Chair Lopez, thank you, and Co-Chair Overdorf, thank you, committee. Thank you, and good morning. Um, as the chair said, I'm gonna sort of set the table, and our goal is to get to our county administrators what goes into setting that millage rate, making that local decision. Um, Today, I'm sort of excited to talk to you, and first I wanna talk about what makes us unique. I think the cities did a great job, but what excites me is a couple things. We are truly partners with you. When you think about counties and what makes us unique, we are political subdivisions of the state. Okay? And many of the services that you provide, we provide them together in partnership. I think the other unique thing is that collectively, my almost 400 county commissioners and the 120 members of the House, we represent the same people. And so I think that makes us unique going forward in this shared partnership. A couple things about counties, other things that make us unique. When we talk about counties, we say the word county, and I think we're all here now. We are 6 governments in one. We've heard a lot about the constitutional officers. So you have the Board of County Commissioners, and then you have the 5 constitutional officers, all together in one budget in a consolidated audit, but we're all together. Okay? There are some things in our partnership, and I just call them county responsibilities, and just a couple of them. We've talked about public safety. We'll talk about public safety for the next 3 or 4 months. You're aware of that. But as I get into this, it's more than law enforcement and corrections. Okay? I think we're very aware after last year about emergency management, and I think Chapter 252. Okay? We can talk about EMS. If we go into the healthcare arena, I think there's a state health department in every county. We work in partnership, not just on health issues, but I think sometimes it moves back and forth between the health department and DEP, but something simple as the approval and permitting of septic tanks. Okay? Together, there's things that we work together on. Of course, of elections that function as a constitutional officer, and I could continue. I think one unique thing also where we're partners at almost 100%, and I was unaware, this sort of shocked me, but I talked to a couple members of the committee earlier this summer. Retirement and our local pensions at the county level. Every county employee hired after 1970 is a member of the Florida retirement system, along with you all. And what's important in that is that those rates are set up here during the appropriations process. There are a handful of county commissioners, maybe that opt out. In terms of our line employees and our employees every day, we are members in the same retirement system as state employees. Okay. And setting the stage, I want to go back to your first meeting. In the first meeting, you were given, staff gave you a formula, and that's how we want to organize our thoughts. And I've sort of simplified it, but the tax base starts with the market value, assessed value, and then taxable value. So our tax base times tax rate simply equals revenue, property tax revenue for us, which then we can discuss expenditures. Okay, this graph is one of the most important for me in terms of if you want to know what these county administrators think about or the challenges or what goes into their decision-making process, this is what's happening. And I think it's happening to everybody, to cities and counties. But if we think about the formula, the dark blue, that is the market value, just value. Okay, that's sort of the real world and what's happened between 2020 and 2024. Okay, the truth in that, we all know that the values have jumped. Okay? The light blue, or the lighter shade of blue, is after assessment limitations, after exemptions. I think Representative Steele alluded to it yesterday. When you take off the government-owned property, things that are not taxed, you get to a taxable value of property. Okay? And you see that has also risen. But I want you to notice the red line, and here's what makes this, and I commend you all, this is very complex. Okay? Our values are rising, but one reason, and you spoke about this yesterday when you're talking about counties and the wealth of a county. That red line represents the ratio of taxable value to just value. You see that ratio is shrinking, which means access to our potential tax base. okay, over the same time period, and these are statewide numbers. This graph right here will represent the scenario, I believe, in 62 counties, where the values are going up, but our access or our ratio of taxable value to just value is shrinking. And to give you an example, in 2024, Walton County has the highest ratio. They have access to 73% of their tax base. Okay. The lowest ratio, fiscally constrained county, which goes into this, would be Glades County. Their ratio is 17%. So this is where we start, and then you would apply a millage rate. Okay. But understand, and I know we can talk about fiscally constrained counties and the counties in between, but when of your tax base, you can only access 17% of it. That's a challenge. Okay? And even at, I believe, and my staff gave me, Walton County in 2024 is at 73%. That's down from 83%. And so these are some of the challenges that are happening. And here's the real challenge. Our revenue system is based on taxable value, the light blue. I think when you listen to these county administrators and they will talk about expenses, ask them, listen to them, their expenses are based on the real world market, okay? Which I'm not gonna say are at the market value, but they're somewhere higher than taxable value. Taxable value is a market created by us through laws over time. We've all voted for them to protect people, right? That market value represents the real world. And I'll give you an example. We're all members of FRS. You have some of the best appropriation staff in the country. Every year, I think if House Appropriations meets here, you get a bill that goes with the appropriations packet that says, here's what the FR rate should be this year. Okay. That bill, that staff analysis is based on an actuarial study to say, here's what we need to do in adjusting rates to keep FRS sound at an acceptable level. Okay. But I don't think that study takes into account, hey, what are counties and what's the impact of Save Our Homes? What's the impact of these exemptions? What are the county's ability to pay? And so that's the difference. And we go down the line, we start talking about construction and other issues, that our revenue system is based on the Florida market, which we have politically designed and made decisions. But some of our cost drivers for expenses are not protected from the real world. And I think you will hear as you listen to them carefully that that creates some of the challenges when they are making decisions about millage rates. Okay, briefly, and we've talked about this, and I just want to hit on the other part, the questions in terms of base. Here's what we have on property mix, okay, statewide. And this is from the Florida Department of Revenue, and this is based in terms of generated revenue that we receive. The homestead property is about 35% of the mix, and non-homestead property is about 64, 65%. Okay, and so again, this comes later when we get into November, December, but you know, our protections, and we'll get into who wins, who loses, or who gets protected or not, but sometimes the burden of paying property taxes will shift one between the other, okay? For today's purposes, and really, I wish I would have done another slide and maybe another meeting. If you look at that non-homestead property pie, and this is real property, you could really split that pie up because that could be residential, non-residential, commercial, ag. We could do a separate analysis on that because that part of the pie is going to be different in every county, but it will impact decision-making in terms of services provided, which then have cost drivers and strategies. Okay, here's the truth for you. I know you've been asking, so I just want to put it out there. For, when I say FY25, we've got about a week left in FY25, so these are the rates set last year. If you look at the second and third bullet, I've got 5 counties that went back to the rollback rate, so it's sort of neutral. I've got 4 that went below the rollback rate, which we could call a tax cut. Okay? 21 counties and 36, that should be 57 if my math is correct, which is they either maintained their millage rate or lowered it, but still above the rollback rate, okay? And that's the question we're gonna get. There's 57 that maintained or lowered, but not below the rollback rate, okay? And then I had 1 county last year that increased their millage, should be an asterisk, and they really sort of did a millage swap. They lowered their countywide debt millage and then moved it over, so they really maintain, but in terms of, I'm just doing operating millages. Does this not include MSTUs? But now I want to go back. So here's the truth. We're not hiding from it, okay? But I want to go back. Remember the pressure I talked about, okay? Look at the red line, and my cost drivers for expenses may be closer to the dark blue bar, okay? But my revenue system is based on the light blue. And so the two are not matching up. There's a disconnect, and you see that gap is getting bigger. That's why my ratio is decreasing. And so now we go back and look to millage rate behavior. I want you to think about it in those terms as you talk to my county administrators, that it is a challenge because my cost drivers are not staying stagnant in all places. And each one of them have different cost drivers, and I want you to listen to them and talk to them and ask them, hey, how does this mix? Okay? But there is this disconnect and maintain, and I mean, I applaud the four. We should get the four up here that went below rollback rate. And I haven't talked to all four of them, see what they did, work circumstances, whatever. But this is our reality, and this is the truth. This is what happened last year. And the good thing when you talk to them, all three county administrators, they either have finished or will finish this week their budgets for 26. So this is fresh in their mind. They can talk about what they did in the past 2 weeks. Okay, and just highlight statewide on revenues, surprise here, okay? Property taxes are second. Charges for services are first when we look at it statewide. And now, property taxes, while important, and I think the number is in our report, and I'm gonna give it to you. Okay, 32 counties, so almost half, property taxes lead. But when you see charges for services, how many people have ever flown into Miami-Dade County? Okay, Miami-Dade County owns the airport. Okay, that's where you think about charges for services. Those larger counties that do have utilities, while counties don't get into electricity, we do have water utilities, solid waste, those things we charge for service, or the strategies there. When in terms of enterprise operations, you run it like a business. So we count Duval as a county, so you think JEA and those utilities and things like that. So that's where charges for services come in. In roughly 15 counties, charges for services, those larger counties, that's the leading revenue. And then not known in here, but it's in our report, so you also know, I have 20 counties where intergovernmental revenue is the largest revenue. So I want you to think your smaller counties, fiscally constrained counties, this is shared revenue either from the state or the federal government. That's their number one revenue source. And I think I just spot checked them last night. Property taxes might be second, okay? But think small county, think fiscally constrained, where intergovernmental revenue is already their number one revenue source, okay? And just expenditures, when you look at it statewide, no surprise here, public safety. But the thing I want to stress to you again is that at the county level, public safety is just not law enforcement and corrections. If you look at that orange box, it's everything in that list. Think EMS, fire rescue, emergency management services. I think the ones that people forget about, protective inspections. We all love building inspections, right? I got a couple members in here that won't let me in their office because we talked about inspection processes over the last couple of years. It's actually classified by the state as a public safety function. That's why I'm so passionate about it. And that's why our guys are so passionate about it. Whether, beyond comprehensive planning and the code is whether a house can withstand a storm. Is it built correctly? We take that as a public safety function. And that's how it's classified by the state. Some counties provide consumer affairs services. And so that's when I say public safety, all of that goes into that bucket. Okay, last, I just thought it would be important. I think we've gotten some questions. Expenditures by type. I think this is important for you. The three don't change. 1, 2, 3. The order may change. Now here, statewide, says operating expenses are number one. Okay, when we look at statewide numbers. Again, I would tell you that is skewed a little bit by our larger counties who have larger operations, enterprise operations. Again, Miami-Dade Airport. I mean, how many people know that Miami-Dade also operates for almost 3 million people, a public hospital? Okay. And for instance, in Miami-Dade County, public safety is not the leading expense, it's human services, because that's how hospital services are classified. But if you look in the blue box up there, personnel expenses do lead in 39 other counties. With operating, although they're in larger counties, so the money skews it, they're in 26. So in terms of the stats, and in the report, I know we emailed you Friday and again last night. There are tables in the back of that report that show you by each county. I think there are links on that website where I've taken these 5 or 6 same graphs and I show you your county. You can link to each county. And the purpose of this is to start this discussion. Is for you, in continuing your homework from the co-chairs, is to go back and now ask very specific questions why these numbers are. But in terms of our partnership and what we do, this will hopefully set the stage for you, for the county administrators. Okay. And just the key takeaways as you listen and ask them questions. It's just that if you go back to that first graph, just that alone, and what you're trying to do and what you're attempting is very, very complex. Okay, I commend you again, it's hard. And for that same reason, when you listen to them, it's hard for them at the county level, at the local level, to balance and deal with this issue. Again, remember, and I'm gonna try to keep drilling this if you talk to me the next 3 months, the growing disconnect and the difference between taxable value and market value, and what that means for what is our revenue system based on, and what are our cost drivers for expenditures, and how does that play out? I think that's very important in some of the challenges. Um, Not necessarily for today, but you've talked about it as we go in the future, the shifting of the burden. When we looked at homestead versus non-homestead, for today, not necessarily in terms of how we make decisions, but again, it's an issue that eventually we will have to address. Um, okay, back to the millage rates. We didn't hide from it. I put it up there. 57 counties stayed at the same millage rate or lowered it, but didn't go to rollback rate. But listen to them and why, and ask them questions, challenge all of us why. It's there. And again, it goes back to things being complex. And I think listen today closely, just the challenges I already talked about the cost drivers. I call them responsibilities, and they're shared responsibilities. Whether you call them, some are mandates and some are real responsibilities, whether they be in the Constitution or statute. We're in this together, but they all create challenges. And one of the things I don't want people to forget, we are political subdivisions of the state, and some of this stuff is our responsibility, whether by law or it just makes common sense. But property taxes are a local revenue source, and there still has to be that element, I believe, and ask them and listen to them. How do they deal with that local element of local choice, all right? The one thing I want you to understand that we get, and I know you get it, is not our money in terms of county commissioners. We don't view it as our money. It is the money that belongs to the citizens. And so we can't forget when we're being evaluated on whether it's waste or what we do, I think they do a great job of meeting their responsibilities, but what about, and I think some of this gets into the transparency discussion, local choice with local tax dollars. Where does that fall in? Is there still room for that as we move forward? And I think as you listen to them, I want you to consider that. Okay, and finally, before we get into their presentations, just think about this, and this is not just for today, but as you hear them, and the next couple months moving forward, I put the formula back up. We can't forget it. It's so important, but it makes everything so much easier. Okay, and then we'll get into, if you let me come back again, I'll talk about the left side of the equal sign and the right side. I'm not gonna get into that today, but last week we met in Gainesville. We had a policy conference. I had over 150 county commissioners and staff. Number one question to me was about goals. Say, hey, Davin, what are they doing? What are their goals? I said, we'll get to that. We're still in the education process. Everybody's got homework we're discovering. But listen today in terms of potential short-term goals and long-term goals. This is probably a session number 20, whatever. I've been through a lot. Some of your staff has been here a long time. This is probably the 3rd or 4th major attempt to do something big with property taxes. And the one thing is consistent, I was joking last night, we wind up right back here doing something major for property taxes. Again, we're back here again, okay? But you have now in this moment, and you're doing a good job. And I don't want you to forget, I think in 2 years and 27 is the TBRC, where we will take another whack at this, or this may be on the table. I don't know, it depends what you come up with. But I think there are some short-term goals. I think as you listen to them, decide what's achievable, and then what is maybe long-term, what's gonna take longer than 3 months. Think about short-term, should it be statutory or long-term? I mean, do we need to, unless we're sure, putting something in the Constitution? That goes to the second bullet, as you understand the impacts, okay? I think when you hear them today, we have to be sure as we continue to move forward in understanding the impacts. But I think this committee has shown, one, your access and willingness to bring any and everybody in front of you to make sure you understand. And so that's encouraging to me and to my members. And last, as you listen to them, we met this morning, we're all open-minded, searching for a win-win. And I want to be sure you understand the win-win is not us versus you. The people, the citizens are on both sides of that equation. What we talked about this morning is the people getting the biggest bang for their buck, right? Saving or being efficient in their use of tax dollars, but still getting the services they need and want with that local aspect. So the people are on both sides of that win-win, and I mean, we're willing to do whatever to try to figure it out with you, but I think it's important that in terms of our focus, and you listen today and ask them, keep these things in mind as you hear from them, okay? So with that, Madam Chair, I want to get right into it. We're first with Deborah Manzo, who's the County Administrator in Okeechobee County.
Thank you, Ms. Manzo, for being with us. You're recognized to begin your presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. While listening to my colleagues at the city, I did not want to repeat some of the processes and things that you heard that are very similar to us, so I have modified my comments that I was going to make. This year marks my 41st year of working in local government. 36 of those years were in Palm Beach County, working for 3 municipalities, and the last 4+ years have been working for Okeechobee County. Transitioning from a large urban county to a physically constrained rural county has been a very different experience. In Okeechobee County, every dollar counts, and it matters, truly matters. Not only do I manage the daily operations of the county that includes 29 departments and divisions, but I also am currently serving as the Interim Airport and Commerce Director for the 4th time in my 4 years that I have been there. So my story is an example of a challenge, and that is at our airport, which is a vital part of our community. It covers 863 acres. It has 2 runways. We have 50 leases for aviation purposes and businesses in our Commerce Park. The county supports the airport when it needs revenue. This year, in fiscal year 26, only $2,200, but any given year that changes. And in fact, if the legislation goes through, about 100% of funding for airport grants requiring rural counties to come up with that 20% match, then of course we're going to have to help fund the airport even more. So the airport operates 7 days a week, and we operate our own fixed-based operations. We do that with 4 staff and the director. At one point, we were down to 1 line technician, fueling planes, and myself. During that time, I personally fueled jets. I climbed on a 10,000-gallon avgas tank to measure remaining fuel. And if you did the math of 41 years working for local government, you can probably guess my age while I'm up on top of that fuel tank, and accepted fuel deliveries, tasks that are normally performed by technicians. This is the reality in physically constrained counties. When resources are stretched, we step in to keep essential services running. The broader challenge extends well beyond the airport. Like many small counties, Okeechobee must balance the needs of all of our agencies, constitutional offices, and the Board of County Commission departments. These responsibilities include maintaining parks, grounds, and as you heard, those buildings that we're responsible for maintaining, like the courthouse, the sheriff's office, the jail, clerk and controller, tax collector, property appraiser, supervisor of elections, of course, our planning, zoning, building, code enforcement, library, our fire stations, the emergency operations center, E911, roads, drainage, sidewalks, solid waste, and all those other infrastructures that we maintain. Our funding picture underscores the challenges. Ad valorem tax revenue provides 40% of our general fund. Our 40% for fiscal year 26, which will beginning October 1st, is about $35 million. 72% of that revenue goes to fund the constitutional offices. In fact, public safety services that includes law enforcement, it's going beyond the law enforcement, because in the 72% that I talked about, that was only for law enforcement only, but we contract with the sheriff to provide corrections, court security, animal control. So including those in emergency management, through judicial court system, medical examiner's office, they total $27.8 million, which is 88% of what the county receives in ad valorem taxes. The remainder of the general fund comes from the half-cent sales tax, small county service tax, state revenue sharing, grants, and fees, for a combined total of $82.8 million. Beyond that, we rely on 27 special revenue funds, totaling $85.5 million. Our total budget for fiscal year 26 will be $169 million. That is down $20 million from our current fiscal year 25 budget, which is $190 million. Most of that is because of grants. So since I've been at the county, we've been able to, we have applied for about $70 million in grants. We've received about $47 million. So as projects get completed, of course, we'll see a reduction in our budget. So, and then whenever you include the special assessment for fire and EMS, and on top of what we pay for in general, out of the general fund, that equates for $40.3 million, in the county's budget. So the point I want to emphasize to the committee is that every revenue source is essential to maintaining the level of service for our citizens. Even small reductions in property tax revenue have an outsized impact in counties like Okeechobee, where there's very little flexibility and limited alternative revenue sources. The biggest impacts for expenses come from inflation, such as construction materials, supplies, the contracts we have with vendors for maintenance, pool chemicals, utility increases, software programs and maintenance, cybersecurity, compliance with minimum wage, Florida retirement system, health, property, and casualty insurance increases, vehicles and equipment. In fact, to purchase a fire truck right now, it is $650,000. An ambulance is $450,000. So right there is $1 million. And the impact of state and federal new legislation and mandates also has an impact on our budget as well. While our property values have gone up, the county has been good stewards balancing these increases while bringing down our millage rate from 8 mills during the past 6 years. The current year, fiscal year 25 we're in, we reduced it to 7.9 mills, and then in fiscal year 26, we have reduced it yet again to 7.8 mills. So I appreciate your attention to these challenges and your consideration of how property tax affects physically constrained counties like ours. And I did want to answer a couple questions as you asked the city, so you have that information. And some of them was, we have 2 lobbyists. We have a state lobbyist and we have a federal lobbyist. We have a reserve policy. Our reserve policy is 25% or 3 months for the general fund, and our general fund is 34%. Now, we also have to fund all those other 27 special revenue funds whenever they don't have sufficient revenue sources to keep them afloat. So, and then our reserve policy also says that 10% reserves for any special revenue funds that have personnel in them. And then for the solid waste, fire, and EMS, which is our special assessments, that whatever the special assessment brings in, that's, their reserve balance. Our average salary for our Board of County Commission staff is $53,192. For fire rescue is $57,702. We have 7 videos that we have done recently that are about 1.5 to 2 minutes each on our website. That's tells our residents how their property taxes work. So it's a very basic and provides good information on our website for that. I also can tell you that whenever we had in the 2000s, whenever we had the decline in the property taxes and values, that at the cities, we had to reduce services. We weren't able to hire some new staff when some of those vacancies occurred. We had layoffs. We had to reduce parks and recreation programs and increase fees. We had less code enforcement, or we shifted that code enforcement to other personnel, like our building inspectors had to do the code enforcement. Also wanted to let you know that for what we can do, we're looking at impact fees. In 2013, the Okeechobee County stopped collecting impact fees. We are now going through an impact fees survey, so we're looking at that. A couple things that you say, what can we do as the state? Our population is 40,000. In Medicaid, we pay $1 million. So that's something that you could help us with. Also, the medical examiner, we pay our portion. I am included with Indian River County, St. Lucie County, and Martin County, and we are building a new building for the medical examiner, which was definitely needed, but that building is $22 million. The court system and security also costs that the county bears, as well as Department of Health. And then the other thing is just thinking about some of the legislation that's approved, because, for instance, recommending a 42-hour work week for firefighters when we currently have the FLSA cycle, while I don't know how we're going to be able to afford that. We will have to increase our special assessment if that happens. But I think that some of our counties along the East Coast, which we abut, are looking at that. And if we don't keep pace, at least somehow with them, then, we're not able to maintain personnel. And and also increases in benefits for police and firefighters too, because that all comes back, and we got to figure out services we're going to provide, or what we're going to do to now pay for those. Something else may need to go. Thank you so much.
Ms. Manzo, very much. I appreciate you answering some of those questions preemptively. Thank you. Mr. Majka, I hope I've pronounced that correct. You're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, thank you. Members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. I've asked to talk to you a little bit about Bay County's story, where we are and as a community, and what our priorities are, and what we look at during budget time. I have been a public servant since 1989. I came into public service as a firefighter. I've worked my way all the way up from that position to the position of county administrator. I had the opportunity to serve as the city manager of the city of Cocoa Beach for 2 years, so I have a little bit of experience on both sides of the coin, county administrator versus city manager. We're a coastal community located in the Florida Panhandle, impacted by Hurricane Michael in 2018. The three things that drive our decision-making process are recovery from Hurricane Michael, what I would call non-discretionary funding, and growth. Specifically to Hurricane Michael, our recovery process has lasted the last 7 years. To give you a little context and some of the pressures that puts on our budget, there was a question asked earlier about the FEMA recovery process. Our community had to lay out almost $500 million with a B after Hurricane Michael. A majority of that was for debris removal. Those of you that are familiar with how the FEMA reimbursement process works, you have to float that money on the front side and then pay it back on the back side. You can imagine a community of our size, $700 million budget, $500 million is not something that we carry in reserve. Quite honestly, when we went to our creditors to ask to borrow money after the hurricane, I quite frankly expect to get laughed out of the room. But surprisingly, because of our good economic stewardship, our financial position, we were able to secure that funding. Unfortunately, as we sit here today, we still have $100 million of that on the street waiting for reimbursement. That's costing me about $4 million a year in non-reimbursable interest. So things that are putting pressure on my community, a number of those things we don't have control over. recovery from Hurricane Michael is one. Growth. We are the third fastest growing MSA in the country. We're only outpaced by Marion County here in Florida and Myrtle Beach. So a lot of our decision-making is based on where are we going in the future. We're a predominantly tourism-based community. We're funded through, our economy thrives on our military bases and then industry. So as we grow, we have many challenges that other communities have. Infrastructure, for example. There's a limited amount of our infrastructure that is paid for out of ad valorem. If you take a snapshot of our budget, there was a question asked earlier about budget summary. I think that'd be a great idea. We do that as a community, but I think that would be a really outstanding tool for communities to have to produce to kind of reduce the budget down to, where does the money come from and where does the money go. But when we look at what's driving those decisions, we are, again, a predominantly what I would call, most of you would probably look at us, we're defined as a medium-sized county, but I would say you would probably see us as being more suburban in nature. As growth is occurring, we are becoming more urban. Our rural areas are becoming more suburban, and our rural, or I would say our rural communities, and then our really truly rural areas are becoming rural community based. So with that becomes increases in demand for services. I can tell you as a manager, I have yet to receive a phone call from a constituent that says, please stop serving us. The pressures that are put on us by, I don't want to call them unfunded, but I would say non-discretionary spending. You've heard my colleagues mention things such as Medicaid, $3 million a year that we're paying into the state for Medicaid. Several years ago, our Department of Juvenile Justice contribution almost doubled. It went from $800,000 to 1.5 million. These are the types of examples of things that we do not have control over at the local level that we are required to fund. Things such as our constitutional officers. I have a mandate to include their submissions in my budget to my county commission. I have no control, as I do my own staff, on what those requested expenditures are going to be. So we have zero control. We are facing the same pressures that industry faces, that men and women face every day at their kitchen tables when they're looking to balance their budgets. Same inflationary pressures. Things such as you've heard mentioned earlier, the $15 an hour minimum wage. Several years ago, there was some legislation passed, if you recall, that required anyone that received, any public employee that received a portion of their salary from Medicaid or Medicare revenue, in that year, that minimum wage had to go to $15. That was an unplanned expense for us, $1.8 million increase in payroll. Okay, so when we're faced with these, again, I don't really want to call them unfunded. I would just say non-discretionary sources of expense. If we can get some assistance with that, again, there are things that we don't have control over. You heard some other examples mentioned, FRS expenses. We face the same pressures with insurance, work comp insurance, our liability insurance, things of that nature. When we get together every year with the staff level and with the county commission, one of our top priorities in our strategic plan, we have an enduring goal to offer the services that our citizens want and that they're willing to pay for. That's a very key component of what they're willing to pay for. And that's often where we see some friction is when the service desired is exceeded by the willingness to pay for that service. And so we have to balance that. From our total overall budget, if I use a dollar as an analogy, only 26 cents of every dollar comes from ad valorem assessment. The balance of that, the other 74%, comes from some type of fee for service. And that's really a priority when we're doing our budget. We're wanting to have a transactional relationship with our citizens. We want them to be basically purchasing a service, getting something for the money they're paying that they can see, a building permit, water or sewer service, things of that nature. The things that are funded out of ad valorem, again, as you've heard, majority is public safety. 19.82% of our expenditures out of the county budget are public safety related. Majority of that comes out of the general fund. The big drivers there, again, are law enforcement, fire, and EMS. And so we start the budget process from how can we reduce, if possible, the dependence on ad valorem tax to pay for services, support or supplant those expenditures with non-ad valorem sources, and then how do we use those sources to fund those key, what I would call pillar services of the community, those core functions. Davin had and I know you talked a little bit about the equation, and I'm stealing a little bit of his thunder, but I would ask the committee to kind of focus on the expenditure side of that slide, everything that's after the equal sign. If we can get some assistance in controlling that side of the equation, I believe what will happen naturally is your tax rate will go down. And the tax rate will go down because we will not have any justification with our constituents for collecting that money to begin with. As an example, some funds that we have to expend that we have no control over, I go back to the constitutionals. Constitutional expenditures were maybe approached in a different way. If those were not in our budget, let's say if they were the responsibility of the state, that is assigned revenue that I no longer have a purpose for. If you then mandate that I have to cut those expenses with a rollback in the tax rate, that is a real substantive tax cut. And so what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is an example of what that would mean in our community. There is a slide in the report that the Association of Counties puts together that talks about the state mandates that addresses things such as construction and operating costs under public safety, predisposition costs, funding state-defined Medicaid, funding costs of the medical examiner's office. The other constitutional is property appraiser, tax collector, clerk of court, supervisor of elections. If you were to take all of these things and pull them back under the state, take them out of the local county budget, that gives the legislature, one, control over those expenses going forward, okay? And it extracts funds from our budget. If you were to do that, our current millage rate right now is 5.4362 mills. We could reduce that to 4.3162 mills. That's a 1.12 mil reduction, or a 21% cut in the tax rate. That would result in real cost savings to us, or reduction in expenditures of $32.9 million. That is a 30% cut in taxes. That is a substantive way that I think that this can be attacked. Again, we have those components of our budget. We have no discretion over those funds. When a constitutional asks for them, we have the choice to put them in there or not put them in there, and then they have avenues to come to Tallahassee to work around that. So, again, I think we're all oriented the same way. I think we heard earlier, we're all taxpayers. None of us like paying taxes. We all look at this money as our responsibility. We're fiscally responsible for this. Our employees pay it, our neighbors pay it, and we take our responsibilities very seriously. But it does come down to what services does the public want and the level that they expect to be funded at. I think that's where the rubber meets the road, and where there is a challenge. And so we're all going to be faced with disasters. We're all going to have reserve policies to help compensate for that, help compensate for the day-to-day operating expenses. But again, I think we're partners in this with you. We're looking for ways to make it easier on our neighbors, honestly. And so we look forward to working with you and doing anything we can do in a collective manner to help solve this problem.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. We'll move now to Todd Bonlarron. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Chair Lopez, Chair Overdorf, for the invitation, and members of the committee. I also want to say a special thank you to the members of our Palm Beach County Legislative Delegation who are here, Representatives Tendrick, Skidmore, and Weinberger. I can assure you, Chair Overdorf, that your members on this committee from Palm Beach are doing their homework. We've had the opportunity to spend considerable time with them, and we really appreciate the effort that they have given to this initiative. Palm Beach County is one of the largest counties in the United States of America. We're about 2,400 square miles, the second largest east of the Mississippi River, largest in the state of Florida. Many of you have probably visited Palm Beach County before, know us for the East Coast, and it's a beautiful place to be. But oftentimes it's overlooked that Palm Beach County is the #1 ag-producing county in the state of Florida and one of the top producing agriculture counties in the United States of America. And because of the size of our county, it creates some really unique challenges for us. Also, over the last several years, our county has been known and come to be known as Wall Street South. That's spurred about $5 billion a year for the last 2 years in commercial development in our county, which has been some of the record numbers that we have seen. We also have 39 municipalities. That creates some challenges in and of itself, and we're also home to the President of the United States. I'm going to share some of those unique opportunities that we have with the President during our presentation today. One thing I wanted to just kind of share is just cost of living. I think it's important to just understand, that varies from place to place, but in Palm Beach County, we have seen significant cost of living increases over the last 5 years. If you go back to 2022, the average cost of a home was $376,000 in Palm Beach County. Today, 5 years later, that has gone up to $626,000. We've been over $600,000 a year for the last 3 years. When you look at our rental market, the fair market for a 2-bedroom home 5 years ago in Palm Beach County was just over $1,500. That same 2-bedroom will cost you $2,187 today. During that time period, the cost of food and beverages increased 4.4%. We've seen a 14% increase in apparel. We've also seen inflation rates that have averaged about 6.4%, and in years 22 and 23 respectively, that number was 9.5% and 8% respectively. So we've had some very unique challenges that we've had to look at from that perspective. When you look at a county government and the things that we do, and we talked a little bit about personnel. On the personnel side of things, we have a very, very skilled and talented workforce. We employ people that are planners, engineers, water utility operators, mechanics, electricians. And when you look at what's gone on in the national landscape and you put a lot of money into the economy from the federal government and other places in infrastructure, sometimes to the tune of trillions of dollars, we are competing with the private sector because they need planners and engineers and mechanics and electricians the same way we do. And we can't compete with the private sector, particularly when you see those large infusions of dollars that come into our economy. We welcome it, but it is a challenge that we all face and we all have to deal with in our workforce. It's why we have a record number of vacancies right now in our county, particularly in those key areas where infrastructure comes into play, like parks and recreation, like facilities, like water utilities, and like our road and bridge and engineering departments. When we look at construction costs in our county, in 2020, the cost to build an office facility was $300 a square foot. 5 years later in 2025, that number is $650 a square foot. 5 years ago, to build a fire rescue building, it was $400 a square foot. Today, that number is $900 a square foot. So while we have seen increases in our valuations and we have seen increases in the revenues that we have brought in on the ad valorem side, we have seen tremendous increases in almost every area of the budget sheet that we've had to meet in order to keep up with some of the demand. We've seen a large number of people that have moved to Palm Beach County from all over the country, and we welcome that too. We've created some very high wage and high value jobs, and with those people coming in, they have some very unique and high demands of things that they would like, and particularly things that they would like their government to fund. And in those cases, they're very different. I can tell you that the priorities in the town of Palm Beach on the island are very different than the priorities of what they fund in Belle Glade, South Bay, and Pahokee along the rim of Lake Okeechobee. And those are just the facts that we look at in those areas. So just to kind of really quickly dive into some of the numbers over the last few years. Since 2023, new taxes in our county have generated just over $339 million in additional revenue, okay? So of that, our constitutional offices, that includes our sheriff, supervisor of elections, property appraiser, and tax collector, have requested $253 million of that. We've provided that to them. $22.6 million has gone into our CRAs. CRAs, this year we're going to spend about $84 million just to CRAs, right off of the top. And then in addition to that, our capital is at $65 million. We have reduced in the last 5 years millage twice, and then we've also had in 2017 an infrastructure surtax that we put in place to deal with some of the backlog in infrastructure needs that we had that were created in 2008 to 2011. I am happy to say that we are sunsetting that this year early because we put a provision when we went to the voters that once we met a cap of collections that was going to pay for that backlog in infrastructure, that would go away. So instead of it being a 10-year tax, it's now a 9-year tax. So I'm here to tell you that as the local government, we are very responsible. We look very carefully at the bottom line. We look very carefully at some of those revenues, and we want to make sure that we do right by the taxpayers. Those 2 property tax increases that we've made in the last 2 of the last 5 years have yielded back in the pockets of our residents approximately $89 million that they've had. Just looking at this current budget cycle and this year, we generated $112 million in taxes and new taxes this year. In our sheriff's budget, we provided $125 million in new taxes to the sheriff's budget this year. So I did mention that we had a pretty famous resident in our community, and one of the things that we are charged with the President of the United States is providing a significant amount of security. We spend about $45 million a year in providing protection for the President of the United States. We do not look at that as a burden. We look at that as an honor in our community, and the federal government has worked with us on reimbursements. But we don't get reimbursed for everything, and to the FEMA question, we work through FEMA, and that is how we get those reimbursements, sometimes a year or later as we move along. I think that one of the things, too, when we look at how we work with FEMA and the dollars that we put away, it kind of takes me to a time when we were working on the big, beautiful bill with the $300 million in reimbursements for presidential protection. We sat down with the OFMB team in the White House, and the first thing they shared with us was we might be making some changes with FEMA, and what they requested of us is they said, be prepared to save more and spend more. And I think that's exactly what the Speaker of the House did this year, right? With a policy from the Florida legislature, he said, we're going to save 25% of our total budget in reserves. I'm happy to say that Palm Beach County took both the White House's advice and the Speaker's initiative, and we've put aside 24.5% in our reserves for the FY25 year. It's why that we have consistently been a AAA bond-rated county. It's why we've been a AAA rated water utility in our community as well. I shared too with the 39 municipalities that we have, and we're currently right now negotiating with all of them on mobility fees. That has been a lot of fun, and it's been a process. But to Representative and Chair Overdorf's comments about one size doesn't fit all, I've heard him say that a number of times, and that's exactly right. One community, one city, one county, while we have and share some of the same processes, we're very atypical from one another, and the priorities and the things that we do and the things that we spend money on are very different. Just real quickly to share how we start the budget process. And I'm not going to get into all of the timelines because they're very consistent with us as everybody else. But we did talk about restricted and unrestricted funds and unfunded mandates. For example, in Palm Beach County, we have about $49 million in just mandates that are required by state statute for things for us to fund. Everything from Medicaid to our courts, to the medical examiner's office. And I'm not, by all means, not saying that we don't want to fund those. I'm just saying that those are the kinds of things that we have to start with. When we sat down with DOJ, they told us, hey, tell us what are the things that you are absolutely required to. It was a great exercise with them because it really got us to look into there to say, what are we required by statute and where is that discretion? When we look at our constitutionals, of our 4.5 mills that we currently levy in our county, about 3.1 mills represents what we provide to our constitutional officers in this current year, which means that less than 1.5 mills of that 4.5 is what we have for some of the other spending, at least on the ad valorem side of the equation. I think that the one thing that we really wanted to share with you is that to get a really good feel for the uniqueness of our priorities, we listen to our residents when they come to us, when they talk to us about the things that are priorities to them, as well as my other colleagues here, the same way that you do. You as legislators, when you look at your budget and formulate your budget and your staffs go in there, they start with the same premises that we do. They look at those things, and I know having worked, for over 30 years in state and local government, how those state budgets are developed, and they're very similar to the way that we do it at the local level as well. And so we have that category for us in the local government level. Constitutionals, we know we have to fund the sheriff and the other constitutional offices. We know that we've got certain mandates that we have to do. And so that's how we start that process out. And we usually start with our millage rate of where we were, and then we look at that to see how we can make those changes. And that's why a lot of the responsible decisions made by our Board of County Commissioners has yielded in some tax reductions. And it's also why our infrastructure surtax is going to sunset, because while we worked on that backlog, we were also able to build our capital back up to those levels where we felt we could sustain that going forward without some of that additional revenue. So I'm here to say that, local governments don't necessarily get addicted to revenues when they come our way. We do make some very responsible decisions. And I want to thank you all for having us here today. Hope that gives you a good glimpse into some of the inner workings and the decision making, and happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to open up now to member questions. Representative Escamani, you are recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much for both the League of Cities and Association of Counties for presenting to us today. I just wanted to ask about unfunded mandates. I know there's been a lot of conversation about how are you spending the taxpayer dollars. I'm also curious, are there experiences where we're putting expenses in local governments that perhaps could be a shared cost or maybe a cost that you see as unnecessary? Maybe if you have any examples of that, that would be super helpful.
You're recognized. Whoever wants to answer that question.
I'm happy to share a couple of specifics. So, historically, we've worked with the legislature on the issue of Medicaid matches, right? We've worked with Department of Juvenile Justice and who pays what days in terms of the juvenile justice system. We've had a number of conversations about Article 5 and the state court system and who pays for what, whether it's facilities or technology. I mean, those are some of the big picture numbers that are on that list of things that we start with. I think that those are good things for maybe the legislature to just take a look at, have a conversation about it and see, number one, whether those things that you still think that we need to fund or those things that you still think that local governments need to pick up the share that we are. But we track just about every one of those and every one of those statutory references, and we're happy to share those lists with the committees so you can look into those statutes as well.
I'm going to go first to Ms. Manzo, who wanted to answer that first.
And my answer was actually going to be very similar to what Todd had said. The Medicaid, like I talked about, the medical examiner costs, the court system costs, and security, Department of Health costs that we provide a portion. We fund a portion of some of those costs. And then, of course, any legislative changes that increases benefits for police and fire, we, and fund those. Thank you.
Thank you. Devin, if you want to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to explain Medicaid. We keep saying Medicaid, Medicaid, Medicaid. It's amazing that I still have a job because I worked on this probably about 12 years ago. When we talk about Medicaid payments to the state, as you know, usually when people think about Medicaid, it's a federal-state relationship. I believe, and my staff will correct me, I think there are about 9 or 10 states that share their portion of the Medicaid formula with local governments. So people like Florida, I think New York, North Carolina, where they actually share down in a partnership where locals contribute. Probably about 12 years ago when we solidified this deal, that number was at $300 million 12 years ago. And I would have to check with, you can check with appropriation staff. Usually they project this number. It's a straight cash payment from counties. Now in statute is based on a formula. It used to be based on, we tried to do users or recipients, and that was a point of consternation. And so we looked 12 years ago, I believe, at just a pro rata share by county. And roughly, we cut you a check. So example, you share state revenue with us, we collect property taxes, we literally cut you a check somewhere probably between $300 or $500 million. I believe you used to book it in your general fund in the state. But it's just it's a policy decision for the state of Florida, like some other states. Sort of juvenile detention and DJJ, and Todd, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is fiscally constrained counties are exempt, but our other counties, we pay for, let's just say juveniles from our county when they check their ID, and I think it's pre-adjudication. When they're held or detained by the state, you charge us for that, or you used to charge us, probably about 11 years ago. Billing was bad. That was a point of consternation where people were from. We didn't always see eye to eye on this, but we worked out a deal. And so roughly, if you look in juvenile justice portion of your budget, there is a local government trust fund. That's money we fund. I think is 50%, which I have to look at the statute, but the costs that were charged for our pre-adjudication detention. And so, but those are some of the things that have sort of been longstanding policies now over a decade, where it's really just cash payments to you from us. And I mean, the money flows both ways. I used to say, we could just keep our money, you keep your money, or something can be worked out. But those are things we talk about. Again, and explaining facilities for constitutional officers. State court system is yours, all right? But we do pay, I mean, it's a county courthouse. We pay into technology, the actual facility, and I think you need to do something separate. It is just, out of the constitutional officers, the clerks are so complicated because they serve all masters throughout the state. They only serve the board as our sort of reporter and our records keeper, but they serve the court system and the judges. But we do pick up a tab for the actual facilities, court security, and things like Kevlar on the judge's bench. That bill comes to us from the chief judge. So computer systems, it gets technical, and technically the bailiffs who are sheriffs, the sheriffs get that money from us. It's sort of the same thing. We even got into school safety a little bit. Some of that where the schools can't pay for, we do supplement. So those are some of the things that are easily identifiable that are policy decisions, but with financial strings to it. I mean, the money is not endless at your level either. And so that's some of the stuff we historically have done.
So I'm going to, in the interest of time, because we'll never get to our roundtable, I'm going to ask the panel members to be brief in their responses, and also I will not do follow-up questions because I have a very lengthy list of reps that want to ask questions. So I'm going to move to Representative Skidmore. You're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It strikes me that Floridians are in an affordability crisis, but our cities and counties are sharing in that crisis. When you think about the kitchen table that you mentioned, the housing affordability issue for folks is not just their mortgage, but their taxes and insurance. No one has mentioned property insurance as an increased cost to the counties or the cities through the numbers of properties that you have. Are you self-insured, or have those increases not impacted you as significantly as they impact the average citizen?
For everyone, we'll start with.
Yes, ma'am. So we have been adversely affected, just like everyone else. We are self-insured in some areas where we can be. Risk management. We're members of the Florida League's insurance, but then we do also have outside private insurance, and so we are impacted.
Ms. Manzo?
Yes, health, property, and casualty insurance has all increased every year since I've been working in government, I think.
Thank you. Mr. Bonlarron?
We are self-insured in some aspects, particularly on the health side, but we've got pretty sizable premiums that we work on our property side, and particularly with our airports as well. So we've seen some.
Thank you. Representative Steele, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you very much. That posed another one in my mind, but I'll leave that one alone. So I try to be creative in reduction, so I ask questions off the topic, and I apologize for doing that. Thank you guys for coming. Davis-Bacon CFR 200 is a major factor for cost going up for stuff that should be easy and cheap. Are there any state statutes that we can change that would drive cost of construction, drive cost of things inside the state that we have influence over? And I'll give you an example, like a sidewalk, I found out for, I think it was 6 miles, 5 feet wide, was $3.6 million in my county. And I called, people I know in construction. It was $363,000 for him to do it and make 20% profit. So I just want to make sure that we can change statute that could help you guys as well so that we can drive down costs that way as well.
Does anyone want to answer that? Ms. Manzo?
I would love to get back to you on that. I'd love for us to look at that and get back to you, because we do follow manual traffic control devices for a lot of what we do, on roadways and sidewalks, but let us get that information to you.
Great. Representative Abbott, you're recognized for question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make a statement about that chart on the first part. That's not a really good chart, just because it shows a 7% decrease in taxable value to just value, but it also shows a 52% increase in overall taxable value, so it's going to show a huge increase. But for Deborah, first of all, you got some help coming on the airport, I promise. The 80-20 thing is fixing to get fixed. But I represent 4 fiscally constrained counties like yours, but yours would be my richest one if I had it. What is what negative effect, or what part of your budget is going to experience the most negative effect from the if we decrease property taxes?
Recognize Ms. Manzo.
Thank you, Chair. Because of how we take our revenues in and do our expenses, we would just have to look at what, services we have to provide versus what we're not required to provide, and start reductions there, or, find other opportunities to provide some of those services. But we're pretty, our operations, what we have we don't have a whole lot of give in what we have, so.
Thank you. Representative Hunchowski, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Following up on the comments made earlier about the constitutional officers and who they serve and all of that, could someone tell me what portion of the overall county budget goes toward the constitutional officers? How much have the constitutional officers' budgets gone up? And what additional unfunded or pseudo-funded mandates do constitutional officers have?
Ms. Manzo, you can start. Hopefully everyone else can chime in.
Thank you, Chair. So for Okeechobee County, for what we bring in ad valorem taxes, 72% of that revenue goes to fund constitutional offices. And whenever I talk about the sheriff's office, that's only the law enforcement, not all those other services that the county contracts with him to provide, like the jail, known as corrections, judicial security, animal control, some of those services we contract with him. So, and over the years, how much has the increase? I would have to go back and look that up, but every year we've had to increase it since I've been there.
Mr. Majka.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair, I would say out of that $32.9 million I referenced in my earlier comments, I'd say probably 90% of that is non-sheriff based constitutional expense. We did not include the sheriff in our math. From our perspective, we would think sheriffs would need to stay under the local budget, if that makes sense. But about 90% of that 32.9 is majority of that is driven by constitutional officers.
Mr. Bonlarron.
And Madam Chair, I'll just focus in some of the data that I shared about the last, since 2023. Of the $339 million in additional revenue that we've collected, the constitutional increase has been about 75% of that overall. And just also on a public safety side, because our sheriff is a significant part of that, we collect about $2.167 billion in property taxes. We spend $2.112 billion in public safety. Sheriff, and the slide that Davin had up earlier, fire rescue, public safety, emergency management, building. So that constitutes a significant portion of our budget, and about equals what we take in our ad valorem every year.
I would say Representative Hunchowski's question is really very critical, since we've been hearing these high percentages. I would ask you, Mr. Suggs, if you could get us maybe a chart that shows per county, per constitutional officer, how much their increase has been for the last 5 years. I think that's fair enough. And I think if you could pull off the sheriff, as all of you are now beginning to delineate, there's law and order, and then there's everything else. Maybe we could see what the budgets are for law and order, which is obviously critically important to everyone in Florida, and then what are the other disciplines that you have them, doing for you that you're funding. So we'll move to Representative Brackett. You're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each one of the committee members that have appeared today. Appreciate your time. My question is, we talk about constitutional officers, and we obviously have just identified the fact that it's a very large part of the county budget, which I'm a local government guy. I knew that already, but it's been identified here publicly. My question to you is, how much do you push back on your constitutional officers? Do you just accept it? Do you challenge them? I know you challenge your staff departments. How much do you push back on the constitutional officers?
You're recognized.
Thank you. Let me, at the beginning of this past session in the local government committee here in the House, we did a presentation. There was a presentation on everybody except the clerk and the supervisor. There's a statutory challenge process. And so for the two easiest are the property appraiser and the tax collector. Their budgets are done in consultation with DOR. We have ability to appeal. Probably the most contentious one, maybe once every 6 or 7 years, is the sheriff. The sheriff has the ability to appeal their budget to is really the cabinet in the governor's office, and so it happened. I think I'll let them talk about, since they just went through budget, if they can talk quickly about probably what happened this budget season. It would probably be the sheriff is the one where they have to work it out the most.
Ms. Manzo?
I'll go ahead and defer.
Okay. Mr. Majka?
Yes, ma'am. We have a very strong and good working relationship with our constitutionals. I wouldn't necessarily define it as pushback. Look at it as my responsibility to make sure that each constitutional understands our financial picture, what the options are. We try to work in consultation with each other. But again, at the end of the day, I really don't think that we have any authority other than to just, define the financial situation and attempt to work together and try to make sure that they understand where we're trying to go and hopefully come in line with that.
Mr. Bonlarron?
Madam Chair, first off, I would say we support our constitutional officers. We support the services that they provide to us. We have a great working relationship with our sheriff. We have negotiated with him from time to time on a number of items that he's brought forward, and he's helped us out in those areas. We had a little issue back in 2000 with an election, and so we've been very supportive of our supervisor of election and all of those requests that they brought to Palm Beach County to support those issues. And then, even with our tax collector, the Department of Revenues, who certifies that budget, right? They give us a couple of days to comment on it, but once they certify that, we fund that, and whether it's an increase or a decrease of whatever it is. But we try to work with them, but those numbers are large, and the services they provide are large too.
Thank you. We're going to move to Representative Nix. You're recognized for a question.
So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. This is more of a clarification. It's my understanding with constitutionals that they are not required to give you a full line item budget before they come before the BCC, and therefore you don't have single line item veto or any type of removal that comes through. The reason that I bring this to case is I know a tax collector who is saying, hey, we've never really used our budget, but I'm going to use every dollar now. And the Board of County Commissioners has no clue what that means. So am I correct in what I'm being told?
Mr. Majka?
Yes, sir, you are. I will say, though, and you have Rep. Griffiths on your committee here, when we were in the trenches together, I can tell you he very effectively worked with our sheriff at the time and other constitutionals to request.
Yeah.
They provide line on them, and they did. But to your point, they are not required to do so.
And sometimes, it's a follow-up, so I'll shut up. Thank you.
Did you get your answer? Did you get the answer you were looking for? Confirmation that there's no line item. Thank you. We're going to move to Representative Hart. You're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for the presentation. I was just wondering, if we get rid of all property taxes, what do you think will collapse within the first 3 months? Or will you all as counties and cities go out and make something happen to keep police and some other stuff from collapsing?
Ms. Manzo?
That would be 40 million, excuse me, $34 million of my $82 million general fund budget. And I do have other funds that go, other resources that I have to move into special revenue funds like planning, zoning. There's not sufficient funds to support, fees that we collect to support that. So we have to move over like half-cent sales tax or some of those small county surtax monies to support that. So when I look at that, I'm looking at parks and recreation, code enforcement, we also have veteran services, senior services. There's programs we provide like that are outside public safety. Because when I look at what public safety provides, that's, including the special assessments. So I have about $12 million in fire rescue from special assessments. That's $40.3 million. So we would definitely have to take a look at, but that gives you an idea, I hope.
Mr. Majka?
Yes, Madam Chair. The largest percentage of ad valorem revenue that we expend, the largest cost center is on public safety. So that would be law enforcement, corrections, EMS, and fire.
Madam Chair, I mentioned earlier, we collect $2.167 billion in ad valorem taxes. Our next largest combined revenue source is other fees, gas taxes, those kinds of things, everything combined, license permits. That only accounts for about $630 million in our county. So it is a pretty significant delta once you get past property taxes as your next sources of funding. They're just not obviously as significant as ad valorem is. So we would have some very significant across the board, spending reductions if that was the only, option we had.
Thank you. We'll move to Representative Franklin. You're recognized for a question.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And I believe you covered this in the last statement you made around a report. But as the state legislature continues to increase your, I call them fixed costs, obviously we have requirements around benefits that we pass in the legislature you have to carry out. My question is, as you get beat up about increasing your budgets, how much of the fixed costs that are coming from requirements from the state legislature is really a part of or absorbing that increase in your budget that we see over time? And if you don't know that question, we can figure
Ms.
it out.
Manzo, you're recognized.
And thank you. And I'd have to get back to you on that, sir. I don't have.
Does anyone have it? Mr. Majka?
Can I get a little more clarification on the question, or we can certainly get back for time?
Let's have you get back. And if you need some clarification after the meeting, we'll make sure that Representative Franklin's question is answered. Mr. Bonlarron, anything?
Just very quickly, Madam Chair, Representative Franklin, I think that, we talked about what we start off in terms of those liabilities immediately that we have to fund and went into those in details. I mean, FRS is obviously one of those which we contribute on behalf of all of our employees, and that's a variable rate depending on what is decided from an actuarial perspective by the legislature each year. So we have to make those adjustments, and they can be in the, millions and millions of dollars every year depending on, that legislation that's passed each year.
Representative Owen, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking up at this list, I don't see not-for-profits up here. So my question is, are not-for-profits funded out of the general revenue, meaning from property taxes? And then to the Steel's heads in the way I can't see it. Also, you mentioned the CRAs. In the city of Tampa, they drive me crazy on what they spend CRA money on. Could you define what those funds are specifically supposed to be used for? Just particularly because, like I said, in Tampa, we're funding to house artists, for example, and I don't believe that's what it's for. So two-part question, not-for-profits.
It appears to be two questions, Representative Owen.
Sorry.
You have two questions then to answer very quickly, please. The nonprofit and then the CRAs.
Nonprofits, very little. We have mental health services that we fund about $75,000 for two different organizations. And what was your other? CRAs, we don't have any CRAs. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Majka?
Yes, Madam Chair. So we discontinued funding not-for-profits after Hurricane Michael, again, reprioritization. We do have one that we fund. It's for public health. It's a public health clinic. It's a diversionary program to keep people from going to ER. And I'd really like to have an offline conversation with you about CRAs. Perhaps Rep. Griffith and I can speak to you about that, but it's approaching $20 million a year in our budget that comes in and goes out. We have no control over it.
Mr. Bonlarron?
Madam Chair and Representative Griffiths, the the issue on not-for-profits, we actually had a very extensive discussion at our board meeting just a couple of weeks ago on that. We do spend a good amount of money on not-for-profits, but a lot of those sort of meet the needs of our strategic priorities. So for example, substance use and abuse and mental health, we're not the experts internally to do that. And so we rely on a lot of our not-for-profits to do those kinds of functions that are strategically prioritized by our board. But we have put a lot of our not-for-profits on notice and said, we're going to really look at every one of these budgets and, same way that the legislature has to make those determinations going forward. CRAs, we have 13 CRAs in the county. We actually have one of those CRAs, the county itself. We will be spending about $84 million that will be going out to that. Obviously, it's defined by what those dollars can and cannot be used for. In some of those CRAs, they're incredibly successful in some of the reinvestment that they've done, and the whole idea is to get dollars in there to take areas that have been blighted and to reinvest in them to give them some more life.
Thank you. Representative Stark, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question mostly is to Ms. Manzo because you brought this up previously. You had mentioned the average pay for county commissioners, for example, was $53,000, I believe you said. So my question is there some kind of criteria by which these pay is established? And I'm sure it's different county by county, but how would that be established for the individual municipalities?
You're recognized.
Yes. Thank you. And yes, that's for our Board of County Commission staff that we have, not the Board of County Commissioners themselves, but for the staff, the average is the $53,000. And we do salary surveys every year, and our salary surveys are very unique because we have this east counties, those along the East Coast that make very high salaries, and then we also compare to counties that are similar in size to Okeechobee County. So, and then we take an average of the both to then determine what that salary level should be.
So based on that, can you tell me if you all know across the board, since you're the Association of Counties, if there is criteria established for pay levels? Well, it could be for the cities. I didn't ask the city association that, but for the county associations, do you have such a standard or criteria by which it's established?
I think that's a question for you, Mr.
Yeah. For elected officials, the good news is it came out yesterday. The state published yesterday. Elected officials are set by statute. And I think it's either EDR or OPAGA. I think it's EDR. I got it from Steve O'Kane. So that came out yesterday. Similar to what Ms. Manzo said, we get requested, like at the county manager level, at the high level, we may participate or even from time to time orchestrate salary surveys, but there is no standard for actual staff. There's no law or standard, say for county managers or county attorneys. We may facilitate surveys and share information amongst all our counties, but no law.
Thank you.
My real question is about elected officials.
Yeah.
Got it. Representative Porras, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you guys. I think we all understand the importance, obviously, and the number of services that our counties provide, but what is the incentive, or do you have any incentive to reduce your budgets or to save taxpayers any money? And based on that, obviously answer, sorry, Madam Chair, two-parter. Do you believe that you're the best steward of the millage rate? Should you set your own millage rate, or should we allow a constitutional officer to do that for you?
That's two questions, Representative Porras.
I apologize.
You're on thin ice. We can start, Ms. Manzo, if you want to answer that question.
So the second question for the millage rate, yes, because I think that our elected officials understand what their community is requesting. And we have been very good stewards of balancing what we have before us, because we have a $70 million jail that we have been constructing, and we've had to break it down into phases. I've tried to get grants, we all have, and state appropriations for a portion, and we've only had to fund $25 million through a revenue. So we just started this past year, $1.5 million a year for 30 years, to pay for that revenue bond. And remind me your first question, sorry, my mind's...
Do you have any incentive to save taxpayer dollars, reduce your budgets for these county services at all?
Yeah. As far as incentives, it's self-incentives. I will tell you that that whenever I go through and I think it's going to be individually, but very similar. I mean, as a county administrator, I am a very good steward of our taxpayer money, and those 5 elected officials that I have, I report to them, and I want to make sure whenever I bring the budget and present it before them, I have looked at everything. And there's just some recurring costs that there's not a whole lot that we can do with, and you hear what our salaries are. Capital projects is about all, and that depends on what's going on in the county as to what capital projects you can fund and what you have the money to do. When the air conditioning goes out, I got to have air conditioning. So there's just things that we constantly reevaluate and prioritize while trying to bring, balancing that millage rate. I'm sorry, I don't want
No, we're going to go to our last question. Representative Tendrick, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If property taxes were reduced or eliminated, how likely is it that residents would face new fees, assessments, or financial increases, and what might those charges include, and have you had those discussions?
Who would like to answer that? Mr. Majka.
Yes, Madam Chair. I think in short, the answer is we are very limited in our authority to create revenue sources. So we're dependent on the legislature for that. So I think the bigger question is if property taxes are going to go away, what is the solution on the other side of that going to be? I mean, my first look is to cut. So my first look would not be to seek another revenue source. So if the revenue is not there, then we reprioritize and we begin cutting services. So again, as local authorities, we cannot create sources of revenue. That power rests with the legislature. So I think we would be looking to you all to help us come up with that solution.
Chair Overdorf, in closing for this panel.
Thank you so much. Mr. Majka, I think we can certainly help you with that. That being said, the Florida Association of Counties, I really appreciate the information you brought. Members, if you look at the very beginning of this presentation, there's a QR code. You can scan on that. You can get the actual report. Thank you very much, Mr. Suggs. You can scan that, and you can get the report for your specific county if you don't have it already. To the League of Cities, thank you also for sending the reports to the various members. If you have a combined report that you might be able to give to us, and I'm getting a thumbs up from Casey, thank you, so that we can also look at all the various cities out there. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time today, for making the ability to come here. If you have written comments, if you could please submit them to the committee as well. There are some members here that couldn't hear everything, so we just wanted to make sure we got that, and looking forward to hearing from the governor's office now. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. And as you depart, I want to warmly welcome Lita